Did you know that US businesses paid a staggering $145 billion in tariffs between 2018 and 2023? And here's the kicker. Many of those costs weren't absorbed by governments. They were passed straight down the supply chain, landing squarely on the shoulders of business owners like you. The result? Compressed margins, stressed operations, and difficult pricing decisions that can shake customer loyalty. So here's the real question. What if your best defense against rising tariffs isn't political lobbying, but a pen, a spreadsheet, and a better conversation with your suppliers? Welcome to today's episode, where we dive into a critical, often overlooked strategy, negotiating smarter supplier terms to offset tariff impacts. Whether you're a small e-commerce brand or a multinational manufacturer, knowing how to negotiate effectively can mean the difference between shrinking margins and scalable growth. In this video, we'll unpack the key forces reshaping global supply chains, and we'll break down how smart negotiation, done right, can turn external pressures like tariffs into opportunities for increased efficiency and long-term resilience. But before we get tactical, let's zoom out for a moment. The growth of global supply networks didn't just happen, it was built on a remarkable wave of technological evolution, consumer demand, and strategic outsourcing. Understanding how we got here is the first step to negotiating our way forward. Over the last 2 decades, global supply chains have undergone a dramatic transformation. What began as relatively linear and rigid systems have evolved into complex, tech-enabled ecosystems. In the year 2000, global trade in intermediate goods, the parts and components used in the production of finished products, was valued at around $4.5 trillion. By 2022, that figure had nearly tripled, surpassing $12 trillion. This surge was not random. It was driven by a convergence of technological advancement, aggressive cost optimization strategies, and rising consumer expectations. Technology played a massive role. Automation, artificial intelligence, and blockchain enabled unprecedented transparency and coordination across time zones and borders. Meanwhile, companies increasingly sought out lower labor and material costs by shifting production to regions like Southeast Asia, Mexico, and Eastern Europe. These changes were turbocharged by consumer demand for speed and variety. The rise of platforms like Amazon Prime set new standards for delivery and product availability, forcing businesses to adopt fast, lean, and globally dispersed supply networks. However, this remarkable growth has introduced new vulnerabilities. The COVID-19 pandemic, the US-China trade war, and rising geopolitical tensions have shown that even the most sophisticated operations can be brought to a standstill. Tariffs, in particular, have emerged as a major disruptor. What was once a competitive advantage, the global supply chain, has, for many companies, become a liability. This is why negotiating strong supplier relationships and resilient terms is now more vital than ever. It's no longer just about saving on costs, it's about building partnerships that can withstand systemic shocks. Looking ahead, as supply chains become increasingly regionalized and diversified, the ability to negotiate strategically will become a core competency for leadership, not just a task for the procurement team. For years, supplier negotiations largely revolved around familiar themes like volume discounts, delivery schedules, and payment timelines. But in today's environment, where tariffs can disrupt entire sectors overnight, new negotiation levers are emerging. Smart companies are beginning to embed terms like duty absorption, flexible pricing, and risk-sharing clauses into their supplier contracts, not just to manage costs, but to stabilize their entire operations. One powerful example comes from Flextronics, an electronics manufacturer that renegotiated supplier contracts to include tariff escalation clauses. These clauses required suppliers to absorb part of any future tariff increases, giving Flextronics predictable pricing even in an unstable trade environment. This kind of proactive planning helped the company avoid endless rounds of renegotiation every time a new duty was imposed. Another approach gaining traction is currency buffering. A European furniture distributor, for instance, negotiated terms with its overseas suppliers to lock in exchange rates in advance, protecting itself from currency fluctuations that could otherwise erode margins. These kinds of terms not only create financial predictability, but also demonstrate a deep understanding of shared risk. Longer-term strategies are also proving effective. Patagonia, the outdoor apparel company, managed to secure favorable supplier terms by consolidating its volume and committing to multi-year contracts. In return, it gained better pricing, priority in production schedules, and exemptions from certain tariff-related cost transfers. By offering value beyond just price, such as predictable order volumes or long-term partnerships, companies are increasingly able to negotiate terms that strengthen resilience. As supply chains grow more complex, we can expect a greater shift toward cooperative models where buyers and suppliers co-invest in solutions, whether that's compliance technologies, local production facilities, or shared inventory systems. Even the most well-negotiated contracts can't make tariffs disappear, but what they can do is empower companies to navigate around them creatively, strategically, and sustainably. The most forward-thinking businesses are now viewing supplier negotiations not as one-off transactions, but as dynamic, problem-solving partnerships. One such strategy is triangulation shipping. Companies like Nike have found ways to route goods through third-party countries with favorable trade agreements before bringing them into the final destination market. This requires a high level of coordination and trust with suppliers, as well as robust compliance systems, but the result is significant cost savings. Businesses looking to replicate this success should begin by consulting with suppliers about alternative production or shipping paths that reduce tariff exposure and model out logistics scenarios accordingly. Local sourcing is another effective solution. Instead of relying exclusively on overseas factories, companies like Bosch have started forming partnerships with suppliers in closer regions such as Mexico. These relationships allow them to sidestep tariffs entirely by producing goods in trade-friendly zones. Often, this involves joint feasibility studies or co-funded infrastructure investments, but the payoff is long-term supply chain stability and reduced geopolitical risk. Finally, compliance can no longer be treated as a back-office formality. Tariffs are often triggered or increased due to misclassification or missing documentation. Apple offers a great example of how to embed compliance directly into supplier relationships. The tech giant requires quarterly audits and rigorous documentation protocols from its top-tier suppliers to ensure tariff classification accuracy. Businesses of all sizes can take a similar approach by creating compliance checklists and incorporating them into supplier agreements. As we look to the future, it's clear that supplier negotiations will intersect with broader strategic priorities, including logistics, compliance, and sustainability. The businesses that build agile, cross-functional teams to manage supplier relationships will be the ones best equipped to navigate what's ahead. In a world of rising tariffs and unpredictable global trade dynamics, supplier negotiation is no longer a background process. It's a strategic differentiator. Your suppliers are more than vendors. They are strategic partners, and the strength of those relationships, especially the terms you establish, can be a decisive factor in whether your business merely survives or strategically thrives. What we've seen is that companies leading the charge are not waiting for tariffs to go away. Instead, they are taking ownership by structuring contracts that share risk, exploring smarter logistics routes, and embedding compliance into their operations. The challenge is clear. Evaluate your current supplier contracts, start meaningful conversations about evolving terms, and approach each negotiation with data, clarity, and long-term vision. Tariffs may be outside of your control, but your response to them isn't. This is where smart, strategic negotiation becomes your best tool, not just for managing costs, but building a resilient, adaptable business.